Do you know there are over 4 billion social media users around the globe? And as you can see from this graph by Statista and TNW at 2019, there were over 2 billion Facebook users, close to 2 billion YouTube users, and WhatsApp slightly down below 1.5 billion. You know, this is slightly more than 70% of the eligible global population. My purpose today is to persuade you to oppose limiting free speech on social media. I have conducted thorough research on the matter using credible and multiple sources from experts in the field to compile my report. I'm also an active social media user and will not want my right to free speech curtailed. Social media has transformed the world. It has become part of our everyday lives and therefore an invaluable tool and companion in how we communicate, how we do business, and how we address our everyday social issues. It is paramount that the freedom of speech and expression on such platforms be independent of any censorship. I will begin with the reasons why people support limiting free speech on social media, and conclude with the reasons why people oppose free speech limitations on social media. With our roadmap in place, let's begin with the problem. The problem is that some people support limiting free speech on social media. For example, some have argued that Congress should step in to regulate social media sites. And according to a congressional report dated on 27th March 2019 on free speech and the regulation of social media content, there have been calls by legislators to regulate social media sites. In other words, some legislatures want Congress to come up with regulations on social media sites. Another example was the claim by former President Trump that his right to free speech had been restricted following the 2020 presidential elections. And according to a tweet by the former president using the POTUS, President of the United States, Twitter handle, he claimed that Twitter had silenced him and the 75 million great patriots who had voted for him, and accused Twitter of banning free speech. In other words, he felt that Twitter had limited his right of free speech by disabling his personal Twitter account. There are two primary reasons as to why some people support limiting free speech on social media. The first reasons comes from the belief that social media platforms are not protected by the First Amendment. According to a recent class lawsuit filed against social media companies by former President Trump, he alleged that social media companies are limiting free speech by banning user content, and attacked Section 230 of giving too much legal protection to internet companies. By way of explanation, the former president felt that social media sites are given too much protection by Section 230 and are therefore capable of denying free speech to users. However, the social media companies are protected under the First Amendment and may censor content that is deemed violent or harassing. The Supreme Court has recognized that the internet in general and social media sites are important places for people to speak and listen, observing that social media users employ these websites to engage in a wide array of protected First Amendment activity. In other words, the social media sites allow for freedom of speech, but may not, however, have material that is considered harmful. Now, the second reason comes from the belief that social media promotes abuse. According to a brief filed by the National Network to End by Domestic Violence, many have experienced real-life terror caused by increasingly graphic and public posts to Facebook and other social media sites. Terror that is exacerbated precisely because abusers now harness the power of technology, enabling them to reach their victims' everyday lives at the click of a mouse or the touch of a screen. In other words, there is a belief that social media sites promote online abuse. However, there cannot be blanket censorship on content to avoid harassment. It is a matter of context, since intimidation and harassment are already unprotected by the First Amendment. According to the First Amendment clause, true threats of violence directed at a person or a group of persons that have the intent of placing the target at risk of bodily harm or death are unprotected, and regardless of whether the speaker intends to carry out the threat. By way of explanation, this clearly says that any form of harassment that may be injurious to a person is condemned and does not fall within the free speech protection. Now that we have an understanding of the problem and some of the causes, let's turn our attention to the solution. The solution is simple: oppose free speech limitations on social media. The first benefit is that it allows for self-regulation. And according to an article in the New York Times, the social media sites already regulate content, and as private businesses have the ability to choose what is published, users can flag content thought to be inappropriate for review and removal if necessary. This system allows expression without blanket censorship. Although it may not be the best system, it provides checks and balances between the sites and the users. Allowing social media to restrict anything beyond the extreme could result in legitimate expression being suppressed to the detriment of society. In other words, there are checks and balances between the users and the sites, and therefore no need for external regulation. The second benefit is that free speech promotes freedom and democracy. According to the CRS report 2019, Congressional Report Service Report 2019, social media companies have recognized their role in providing platforms for speech. To take one example, in a September 2018 hearing before the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, the founder and CEO of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, repeatedly referred to Twitter as a digital public square, emphasizing the importance of free and open exchange on the platform. In other words, social media sites are an important avenue for free speech and hence promote open exchange of information, opinions, and ideologies. Having looked at the problems, causes, and solutions, let us review what we learned today. First, we learned that the problem is that some people support limiting free speech on social media, such as calls for Congress to regulate social media companies and accusations by former President Trump that social media companies limit free speech. Next, we learned the two reasons why some people want to limit free speech on social media, which include the belief that social media is not protected under the First Amendment, but we learned that the opposite is true. There is also the belief that social media promotes abuse, but we learned that harassment and intimidation is unprotected in the First Amendment. Finally, we learned that the solution is to oppose limiting free speech on social media, and some of the advantages include allowing for self-regulation, since it provides checks and balances between the users and the sites. Finally, it promotes democracy and freedom. I urge you to exercise your freedom of speech, as this is one of the founding principles of this great nation. Thank you.